The event unfolded as more than just a formal gathering. It carried with it a sense of history, pride, and political weight. Those who attended described it as an experience that surpassed expectations. One participant later reflected on the atmosphere with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. He said, "That was a great event. All the guests were very happy to be present, and we learned a lot." The comments captured the sense of unity and purpose that filled the room. It was not just an event for appearances, it was one that left the guests with lessons, reflections, and a deeper understanding of shared values. The central focus, however, was the presidency's message, which stood out as powerful and deeply resonant. Another participant expressed how meaningful those political remarks were, noting their clarity and urgency. He said, "Political messages made by presidency were great. Those words highlighted not only the authority of the speaker, but also the relevance of the message at a time when international discourse often feels fragmented and uncertain. The emphasis was firmly placed on principles that transcend politics and cut across cultural boundaries." He continued, speaking about peace, justice, insisting on that, keeping the world tranquil and calm. This is something what we need. And I believe that every single in the world might have supported these kind of messages made by presidency. The words pointed to values everyone could relate to: peace, justice, and calm. They were not abstract ideals, but practical necessities, especially in a world that frequently drifts toward division and conflict. The statement suggested that these themes resonated universally, beyond the walls of the venue, beyond national borders, touching on something fundamental to human society. But alongside the calls for peace, there was a warning, an urgent reminder about the dangers of forgetting or distorting history. The participant shifted focus toward the troubling trend of rewriting the past. He explained, "We were facing, and we have had a lot of examples coming from all over the world, of the most terrible attempts of revision of historical facts, of everything that was happening in the Second World War. This was not an abstract concern, but a clear criticism of deliberate efforts to alter collective memory for political convenience." He went on to emphasize how dangerous such manipulation could be. He said, "People that were on the other side wanted us to forget what was happening, insisting on something else, trying to create their parallel truth, which has never been the real truth. This reflected a profound frustration with those who attempt to manufacture alternative versions of events, aiming to obscure crimes, erase sacrifices, and shift responsibility away from aggressors." The statement grew sharper as he exposed the machinery behind such distortion. He said, "With huge amounts of money, with dominance of their media outlets and everything else, they believed they could have fabricated everything that was happening during the Second World War, and even a bit after the Second World War. It was a direct accusation that money, media power, and influence had been weaponized in an attempt to rewrite history. The danger," he implied, "was not simply in lies being told, but in lies gaining the power of authority through repetition and reach." Against this backdrop, he recounted his recent discussions in Beijing, where he found reassurance in the firm stance of the Chinese leadership. Speaking of his meeting, he said, "I saw the real determination today when I spoke to President Xi here in Beijing, that he will never ever allow that. He'll always be very proud of Chinese heroic history regarding the Second World War in particular." This determination, he suggested, was crucial not just for China, but for the global fight against revisionism. To refuse the erasure of history is, in his view, to honour truth and defend the sacrifices of those who lived through the war. The weight of the responsibility was clear, and he described it in almost spiritual terms. He said, "This is our job. This is our holy task. This is something that we have to stick to, and not to allow to people that actually launched aggressions against our country today to say that it was like vice versa, and it was not happening in a way that really and actually happened. Calling it a holy task gave it a sense of sacred duty, implying that this obligation is larger than politics. It is moral, historical, and eternal." The question then became, how does one defend truth in practical terms? The answer, according to him, lies in education, dialogue, and documentation. He said, "And that's why we need to print books. That's why we need to put it in our educational systems. That's why we need to speak to each other." These measures, books, schools, conversations, were not secondary actions, but the front line of defense against distortion. They ensure that truth is carried forward, embedded in memory, and resistant to manipulation. Through these reflections, the event transformed into more than a ceremony. It became a reminder of the inseparable connection between history and the present. Calls for peace and justice cannot exist in isolation from the truth of the past. Revisionism, if left unchecked, does not only distort history, it erodes the foundations on which peace and justice must be built. The speaker's insistence on vigilance carried a warning. Without protecting memory, societies risk repeating the very conflicts they seek to avoid. The audience seemed to grasp the weight of these words. Many nodded in agreement, recognizing that the struggle over memory and history was not limited to one nation or one conflict. It was, in fact, universal. In an age of digital media where misinformation spreads instantly, the fight against revisionism has become even more urgent. The event's significance, therefore, was twofold. On one hand, it offered an affirmation of shared values: peace, justice, calm, and unity. On the other, it issued a call to action to defend the truth of history, to confront revisionism wherever it appears, and to protect the integrity of memory against manipulation. These twin messages combined into a single appeal that resonated beyond the walls of the gathering and into the larger world. It was a reminder that history is not a static record. It is a living narrative, constantly under threat of distortion, but also constantly defended by those who value truth. And in this defence lies not only the preservation of memory, but the promise of a more just and peaceful future.